History of Aviation podcast with Derrick, Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
Hello and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast, episode number 62. I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for making us a part of your day. And first off, I am joined by Mr. David Rowe. How's it going, David?
It is going very, very well. I am covered up, busy. I've got a NASCAR race in a week, and I am working like mad trying to get ready for that. Yeah, it comes around twice a year, and twice a year it's craziness. So haven't done a lot of airplane business just of late. I did see a KC-135 out of Knoxville come to Tri-Cities and do a couple of touch and goes. I saw it from a distance. Didn't get to get close, but he went up, met up with a Poseidon, and flew over. So I got a few pictures, and so I'll have a few new things to post in the near future once I get through this NASCAR business, which is ruining my life. Yeah.
And we're also joined by Mr. Julien Martinson. What's going on, Julien?
Oh, hello, Derrick. How are you doing?
Great. Wonderful.
So here in Canada, we have the London Air Show coming up this coming weekend, and so I'm really excited to go and see what the Canadian Ontario aerospace has to offer. And I'm really excited because I think there's going to be a lot of kids there, and apparently it's a drive-through. So can you imagine? You go there with your car, and then you can watch the air show from the comfort of your car, just like in the good old days. So
very nice.
I'm kind of excited about doing that on this coming weekend.
May I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
And a man who actually is about town in his car, Mr. Dave Gorman. How's it going?
Hey, everybody. Things are busy as usual, but doing great. Good to see you guys again. And Julien, and before we started, I missed you on the last one, so it's good to be in your company again, even if it's across a few hundred miles here.
Just a few.
Miles. Yeah, well, we've got a rather interesting topic tonight. We're going to be talking about one of the more unusual and unique individuals in aviation history. His history goes far beyond aviation. There's a lot of things that Howard Hughes has done that he did while he was alive with movies and some kind of secretive funding of projects and deep sub recoveries and Cold War activities, things like that. But we know him, and the reason he's relevant is because we're going to talk about his role in aviation, his history in aviation. So Howard Hughes, a fascinating American. You guys ready?
Yeah, very much so. It's one of my favorite subjects. I'm a huge Howard Hughes fan.
Well, awesome. Some of our listeners will be even bigger Howard Hughes fans when we're done.
Well, if nothing else, there is a massive amount of information on this man. He was involved in so many things that when you start digging around, it's depth. It's deep. He's just, real estate, aviation, movies, the people he hung around with. This guy lived an interesting life.
One not often repeated, that's for sure.
Well,
no.
I'm an old man on this podcast, but in the 70s, he was a very eccentric character, and having not known much about the previous history, there were some things about him with long hair and long fingernails and the will. There were some things that really were strange about him, and so I didn't know about him. There's been movies made about him and documentaries. We've learned a lot more. His history, as it relates to aviation, was in the very early days of aviation. And so planes that he produced, planes that he promoted, planes that he flew, planes he championed. What a enigmatic character.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good word to describe him. He is very enigmatic. I can't even say it now. But I mean, his timeline stretches from the 20s to the 70s. As a matter of fact, I remember him passing away, we used to get a magazine called Newsweek, and there was a huge article in Newsweek in 1976 about, this strange, reclusive, inventor and movie mogul, passing away. And I still remember reading that as a child because, it was on the news. It was everywhere. Everybody was talking about it because he literally hadn't been seen in a decade. Only his inner circle of people knew of him and what he was doing. He apparently did all of his communication via telephone in his later stages of life. You did not see him. He had some pretty big phobias and some OCD issues. And they kind of ruled his life at the end. But that was also sort of the things that made him such a great designer and inventor in his early age. Before it ruled his life, when he could control it and use it, he was building some amazing aircraft, and some amazing technology came out of his companies, the Hughes Aircraft Company, later in development. And I think they invented lasers. Crazy stuff came from this man.
And back on episode number 3, we covered the Hughes H1, which I think was probably the best. Isn't that the biggest kind of thing that surrounded him?
I think as far as the public goes, just as general knowledge, yes, the Spruce Goose is kind of what he's known for. But that was just one period of his life. Right. And a small period at that. This was, in the mid 40s, late 40s. And he did, so many things before that and so many things after that related to aviation, that's just a stepping stone in his story.
So I have a question then. So how did Howard Hughes' career set the stage for his legendary aviation ambitions? And how did he contribute to the aviation career development? So we talk about some of his financial projects and his obsession for flying, which he brought to filmmaking. Does anybody have any ideas about that?
Well, from what I read, he apparently had an interest in aviation as a youngster. He took some early flying lessons and was interested in aviation to begin with. And I think by the time, his father invented a drilling tool that made them extremely rich. And when his father passed away, he inherited all this money and capabilities with the Hughes Tool Company. And I think that his inventive mind, he got into airplanes. He made the Hells Angels movie in the 30s and learned to fly there. Well, he knew how to fly, but really got into flying. And that just sparked a passion to develop faster, bigger, and that kind of set the stage. One of the things, his Hughes H1 racer airplane that he set some speed records in, they came with flush rivets and some, streamlining things that were fundamental to what World War II aircraft designers built from. So he was setting the stage early for the design of future aircraft. Even when he was involved with TWA Airlines, he pushed for the development of the Constellation, which was a groundbreaking, transport aircraft to, transcontinental. It was, bigger, better, faster than anything else. So he was there, designing things first. He was pushing for development of other equipment that would, push the aviation boundaries out.
I got the sense, that there are plenty of people who are good at spending their company's money, but he had his own money to fund some ideas and projects and things like that. So he really was placing himself in the middle of all of these things. It was the Hughes Aircraft Corporation eventually, right?
Right, yeah. Hughes Aerospace, they got involved in space exploration, spacecraft, some pulse engines, I believe that I read. So, I mean, it was a huge conglomerate. They did helicopters. Hughes Aviation just expanded into all avenues of aviation. They did computers, radar,
Satellite.
satellites. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this company had its fingers all across the aviation community.
Well, we were talking about his money. Now, Hell's Angels was one thing I remember about Hell's Angels is it was a silent film, correct? And then in post edit, it's when the technology came around for films to have sound, and he basically completely redid the movie. And that was his,
I believe that's correct.
yeah, and that was his own money. I mean, that was every bit his own money.
Well, he is well known for being a nitpicker. I think his OCD made him very hyper aware of details to the point that I was reading where in some of his movies, if an actress came out and there was a wrinkle in the wrong place on her dress, that he would stop production to fix the wrinkle. Everybody go away, take her back, fix this wrinkle, come back, and then we'll start over. Well, I mean, it's his money. He's paying for it, so he can do that. But I think he, kind of caused his own problems there with spending money. Let me go a quick thing through here. So, back in the 30s, he was involved in a bunch of movies. Well, actually, 1926, he did Everybody's Acting, 2 Arabian Nights in 1927. He did Scarface in 1932. That was apparently so violent that the censors, wouldn't allow it to be seen. And then in 1943, he made The Outlaw with Jane Russell, and it was so scandalous because of her cleavage. So he was always, not only pushing boundaries in aviation, he was pushing boundaries in the movie industry. Everything he was involved in, he seemed to, want the best, to try something different. He wasn't a follow the rules kind of guy.
Right, and going back to OCD is something Dave Gorman, back then obsessive compulsive disorder and things like that weren't as well known as they are today.
Well, they weren't understood, they weren't publicized, so in some ways you might be able to hide it a little bit, and he was a pretty successful person, so he could kind of choose who he might reveal himself to in that sense. So later on in his life, when some of these things came out with some sensational news stories, it really was kind of shocking to realize he'd been living a life where some of these compulsions may have gotten the best of him. But I think, again, when you look at some of the things that he was promoting and pushing and developing and funding, maybe that OCD really did work for him in terms of staying focused and moving the technology around along, adapting, adjusting, all those things. It had to have been, and it ultimately appeared to be pretty debilitating for him later in life. But some of that drive, some of that inventiveness, some of the self-startedness. I mean, I think David mentioned about him being an early pilot. He also he built was it an engine-powered bicycle, like it sounded like a motorcycle or something, at an early age. I mean, he was creative, inventive, and those were not unusual things for people coming of age and growing up during the Depression times. But he had money and was not afraid to pursue these ideas.
Yeah, you mentioned the motorcycle. That was at age 12. He was photographed for a local newspaper that identified him as the first boy in Houston to have a motorized bicycle, which he had built from parts from his father's steam engine.
Wow.
So he built this. Going back, at age 11, he built the first wireless radio in Houston. He's from Houston, by the way. He was born in Houston, so a lot of his early life takes place there. He was the first ham radio operator in Houston. He took his first flying lesson at age 14. He went to a Fassender school in Massachusetts in 1921. He went to Caltech. So, that's a pretty prestigious college. So, he had some good background, and obviously, the family had money, so they could give him a good education. And, with his inquisitive mind, he took that information in and then turned it back out into real world, problem solving things.
Yeah, definitely. And since we got Julien on, Julien, let's talk for just a second about Julien's our airline guy, by the way. So let's talk just a second about his involvement in TWA.
Yeah, so he was involved in TWA, which is the commercial aviation. So Hughes' acquisition of the World Airlines and his vision to transform it into a major international carrier. And so the legacy that he plays is still used today as a role model for many of the airline carriers and their structure, and his role in ordering for the Lockheed Constellation, which became the flagship for Trans World Airlines and revolutionized long-distance air travel. And so in those days, it was very prestigious to travel long haul, and now it's become a little bit more commonplace. But some of the things that he invented and were put in place and are still in place today, and you can see that in different areas of aviation. Hughes' innovations influenced modern aviation with his lasting impact on the industry and his contributions to the development of the pressurized cabin and improvements in aircraft safety. So, coming from an in-flight flight attendant with experience, so that what happens is that as the airplane takes off, the pressure of the cabin changes, but reaches a maximum pressurization of 10,000 feet, which is comfortable for the human being, while the aircraft continues to climb to higher altitudes. And so you might think that that it's easy to, let's say, open up a door in mid-flight, but in actual fact, it's not, because the pressure inside the cabin is higher than the outside, and those doors are made with a push system where the door is blocked into that hole, and so you cannot just open up the door mid-flight. And so, of course, if there's decompression caused by a bomb, then there's a puncture in that pressure, and so the air from inside the cabin goes outside. And so he was credited with this invention, and now we don't think about it because, well, we get on the airplane, the doors close, and up we go, and now we come, and we don't really realize that the cabin is pressurized, but this is the fellow who invented that. Years ago, I was talking to a flight attendant, and she was in the back alley, and they noticed that it was a little bit cold in the back, and they were able to find a leak in the door of the aircraft, and they're like, oh, so that's where the cold air is coming in from. And you know how they found out? They put a napkin around the door, and the door sucked that little napkin into place, and not outside, but you could see it pulling in, just the same way as your vacuum cleaner might suck up a napkin and or a bed sheet or something, and so you can tell that there's a difference in pressure. And so it was the same thing with the cabin door, and so this is part of the mystery of the pressurized cabin, which is credited to Howard Hughes. And so today it's often overlooked, but it's because thanks to that many people are able to travel overseas inside the pressurized cabin, inside the fuselage protected by the wonderful wings of the aircraft.
Things we take for granted sometimes, right?
Well, this is correctly the case, and so Trans World Airlines was also one of the legacy carriers of the aviation industry, and many of the things that came into place, like the uniforms, for an example, from the pilots. They were often captains of airlines. They wear a blue suit with a kepi, and those that concept comes from the captain of the ship. And so the pilots, they wanted also a similar uniform of that of captains of a nautical ship, an airship or an aircraft. But a matter of fact, they could have chosen any kind of style of uniform that would represent their industry, but they chose that. And then since then, the flight attendants have also had their uniforms adapted, and many of those iconic images of aviation can be drawn back directly to Trans World Airlines, which was invented by Howard Hughes.
Definitely, and David Rowe. Let's jump back to 1938, the flight around the world. Howard Hughes.
Oh, where was that?
I threw him off. I'll edit it out.
Nah. No, well, I've got information to go back to Trans World Airlines.
Okay, do that first. Yeah, do that first, and then we'll go.
Okay.
We'll go the.
So here, all right. So going back to Hughes and Trans World Airlines, he was the principal stockholder in the company. He purchased 78% of the stock in 1944. So he was behind the scenes, kind of the person that was in control. He wasn't necessarily always in the front making decisions, but everybody went through him, because he owned the majority of stock. Speaking of the Constellation, where they chose it to be their new aircraft to, fly around, Hughes personally financed TWA's acquisition of 40 Constellations for $18 million. That was the largest aircraft order in history up to that time. So that's the kind of money and power that Howard Hughes threw around for his companies. If he wanted something, he had the money and the power to say, go build this for me. I want this. And as a matter of fact, the Constellation was not the first aircraft that he kind of helped pioneer. The Boeing 307 Stratoliner, he was the first purchaser of that aircraft for TWA, which the Constellation was then purchased afterwards to replace that. So that was two different aircraft orders that he pioneered through TWA, that grew the airline industry. He's pushing for development of these aircraft, and that's the kind of power that he, welded. It's pretty amazing.
Do we have his net worth at the time?
I know what he ended up with. When he passed away, he had a $2.5 billion estate.
Wow.
So, it's not huge by today's numbers, but in the 1970s, that's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I am also approaching a $2.5 billion estate. I'm not approaching very fast.
You'll get there.
Way, I hope.
I thought you meant you were driving up to it.
Yeah. That may be the best I could do. TWA, and going back to what Julien was describing, to me, the height of elegance would have been flying in a Constellation in the late 50s, early 60s. And if I'd done that, I probably at this age would have been wearing a coat and a tie and been dressed, rather nicely for that type of flight. Just that image is something that's kind of burned in my mind. That would have been a golden age of that type of flight. But I've also found it interesting that Howard Hughes, with all of his roles in aviation, that was a heck of a pilot. And for all that he did, he was also putting himself in the pilot seat of a lot of important aircraft, some test aircraft, some big aircraft. And I don't know if there were a lot of similar characters throughout the history of aviation that did all of those things and did most of them really, really well. I know, Dave, you'll talk some about some of his some of his accidents. He went down in a few aircraft over the years, and that's part of the story as well. But he did a lot of flying himself.
Absolutely, yeah. He set some records in his early flight. He did a around the world flight on July the 14th, 1938. That's when he completed it. It took him 91 hours, 3 days, 19 hours, and 17 minutes to fly around the world. And he actually beat another famous aviator, Wiley Post, who did it in 1933, but it took him 7 days plus. So he cut it down by 4 days with his equipment and his, flying capability. So, that was a fast turnaround there. Some other things he did, his H-1 racer, he set a land speed, let me rephrase that, a land plane speed record. There were some seaplanes that were a little bit faster, but he set the land plane airspeed record of 352 miles an hour over a test course near Santa Ana, California. And then January the 19th of 1937, they put some longer wings on the aircraft, and he set a transcontinental airspeed record, flying nonstop from Los Angeles to Newark in 7 hours and 28 minutes and 25 seconds, beating the previous record by 9 hours. So, this man, got in the plane and did the deed himself. He was not afraid to fly. He paid some pretty heavy prices a little later in his life, but he absolutely would get out and fly.
And this is the thing that I admire so much about Hughes, that he had an installable appetite for pushing the boundaries of aviation beyond, which extended beyond personal glory. But he desired to make a bigger impact, to revolutionize aviation, not only in the military, but also for commercial aviation. And so he's really set the benchmark so much higher for the next generation to come in. And so those young people who are now considering careers in aviation, there's so much more technology and so much advancements that, based on the role models of our forefathers, they could accomplish so much more, given the current technology and the finances and the workmanship and team leadership that we have even today. And so I'm fascinated to see what the new generation is going to come up with regarding supersonic travel and outer space travel. I think those areas are still going to be developed a lot in the next few years, because, aviation, it's always that little curiosity just to want to push the boundary just a little bit further. And I think everybody has that little curiosity that wants to just make that difference and do something that somebody else hasn't done before.
That's definitely true. And go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, I think that's an excellent point, Julien, because the height of air travel in the 50s or 60s might have been that Constellation, but nowadays some of that seems kind of quaint, in terms of shorter legs, shorter distances that the aircraft could fly. Jet engines were used to being accommodated and flying fast and flying high and getting from point A to point B and not having to spend all the time in airports and transitioning. So things that were top of the line 50, 60, 70 years ago are extremely passé. So the things we're doing in 2024 and in another 20 or 30 years might look really outdated. I'm sure they will. I kind of hope they are, because hopefully we'll get better, more efficient, and more cost effective. If it involves space and supersonic, hey, I'm in. Where do I sign up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, exactly. And on a related note, so I'm speaking with my daughter yesterday, and we're talking about what we're doing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm getting ready to do this podcast on Howard Hughes. And I go, do you know who Howard Hughes is? And she goes, well, no, she's 20 years old, a college student. And so it's not somebody that she would obviously know. And so I thought for a moment, and I said, well, who would she know that would be comparable to it? And I went, well, you know who Elon Musk is? Well, there's someone who is in sort of the same shoes as Howard Hughes. He is pushing technology. He's pushing boundaries, particularly in space flight, not so much in aviation. But at the same time, here is a person with money and inspiration and ability, and they are pushing those boundaries out, expanding our knowledge, expanding our capabilities. And, that's where I see, there's some similarities to where Howard Hughes was doing this 30s, 40s, 50s. Elon Musk is doing it in the last decade. Who knows where he'll end up? We're sitting back watching and waiting to see. But hopefully his story is as interesting as Howard Hughes's was.
Yeah, definitely. And we were talking about pushing the boundaries, David. That sometimes comes with a price, right? So Howard had a few incidences here.
Well, incidences is exactly the thing. Where's my list of crashes? He was involved in about 4 major crashes. They actually caused him later in life some addiction issues. Here we go. While he was filming the movie Hell's Angels, he was in a Thomas Morse Scout biplane and he crashed. He crashed in the Hughes racer while he was setting an airspeed record. He was flying. This was something I didn't know about the Spruce Goose. Before it was ready to fly, he was flying a Sikorsky S-43 float plane to practice flying off of water. And he had a crash in that aircraft. It actually killed 2 occupants of the plane. Apparently, he got beat up pretty badly, had to be dragged from the crash. The plane sank. He's accumulating a lot of injuries. And ultimately, what got him was he had an aircraft called the XF-11. If you're familiar with the P-38 Lightning, this is a similar looking aircraft, twin booms, but much larger. It's not quite a fighter. It's not quite a bomber. It's kind of an in-between aircraft. And he was flying it on the very first test flight. It had counter-rotating propellers. He had an oil leak. One of the propellers, the oil caused the hub to seize, so the airplane started yawing very badly. And he was trying to land it on a golf course, but he didn't make it. He crashed into a house. The aircraft burst into flames, burned the house down, burned the plane up, and he took some pretty significant burns from that as well. Let me read what happened to him. He had a crushed collarbone, multiple cracked ribs, a crushed chest with collapsed left lung. He shifted his heart from the right side of his chest to the right side of his chest cavity and had numerous third-degree burns. This was a major, major crash. So he spent quite a long while in the hospital recovering from this. On a sidebar, while he was in the hospital in this bed, he didn't like the way the bed operated. So he brought in his engineers and he told them, I want you to do this, that, and the other. And they created a movable bed. It had 30 motors to adjust.
Which is known as the hospital bed today, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a Howard Hughes design. I mean, it's not aviation related, but it's because of an aviation related accident. He was beat up flying his aircraft. And in later life, because of the pain and because of those injuries, that gave him some addiction issues, and that led him, his already, OCD issues that just, made those way worse than they would have probably been otherwise.
However, I think that this is a very good point, that despite the challenges that people face, that they're still able to overcome incredible barriers and overcome the circumstances that lay against them. And these are the lessons that we can learn as entrepreneurs or as engineers and even pilots can learn from Howard Hughes. His visionary thinking and willingness to take risks really set an example for the rest of us in the industry, and no matter what area you're in, that no matter what the circumstances or how they're stacked against you, you're able to overcome and put together a plan, an action plan, and overcome these barriers and still achieve success through balancing technical innovation and commercial liability and related to something that's will bring the aviation industry forward today. And so we should not always just look at the challenges that people face, but be inspired by them, that despite the obstacles that other people face, that we can also overcome our own obstacles and achieve success in our own area.
Very well said.
I certainly agree with all of that, Julien. I think that there's a lot to learn from this. One thing that I do appreciate, though, and I mentioned earlier that back in the 70s, around the time of Hughes' death, he was an eccentric odd man, and there were a lot of stories about the appearance of his body, and it was a sad situation. I think time has been very kind to him, though, and that we spend a lot more time, of course, on this podcast, but in other places as well. There was a movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio, of all people, as Howard Hughes, that paints him in a much better light, or a more complete story. And so the things that he was able to accomplish, the things that he developed, the innovations that he left us with are things that made civilization better, made humanity better, made travel safer, and advanced the cause of aviation worldwide. He is I have to believe that, he definitely left his mark, and that a lot of people know his name, and not because of long fingernails, but because of his career in aviation. So we salute him for all of those reasons.
Absolutely, for sure. And David Rowe, I'm sure you got some facts to throw at us. He always does about this time of the podcast. I always look forward to it. It's my favorite part.
Well, let's go. Dave mentioned he was involved with some exploration for a submarine, the Glomar Explorer, in 1972. Hughes was approached by the CIA to secretly recover a Soviet submarine, the K-129, that had sunk near Hawaii. So he allowed them to use one of his ships, and in 1974 they attempted to raise the vessel. Unfortunately, they only got half of it, and the grapple apparently broke, and half of the submarine fell back to the ocean floor. Another interesting tidbit of knowledge is, did you know that Howard Hughes could possibly be the reason we have the Watergate scandal?
I did not know that one.
Apparently, Hughes was giving money to Donald Nixon, which is Richard Nixon's brother, and apparently had given money to some other people, and the Democratic National Convention had some information, or was believed to have information. And so there's speculation that Richard Nixon had them break into the Watergate Hotel to find out what they knew regarding some payments that Hughes may or may not have made to some people in Richard Nixon's sphere. So it's a very good possibility that, Watergate was instigated on some things that Howard Hughes was doing late in life. And then the other thing was, this one I thought was interesting. Did you know that Howard Hughes is the fifth cousin once removed of the Wright brothers?
No, didn't know that one either. See why I love this?
Apparently, his mother, who is Aline Stone Gano, she had a brother John Gano from 1727 1804. This was a minister who allegedly baptized George Washington. So through John Gano's sister, Susanna, that's the bloodline that leads to Hughes, who goes back to the Wright brothers. So there's you a tidbit. Hughes is a family member of the Wright brothers.
That's fitting.
I did not know that.
Well, that's, you start digging around, and like I said, there is an absolute ton of information about Howard Hughes out there. You start digging, and you'll just be amazed at what you find.
Mm-hmm.
And so on that note, there's also, for those people that want more information, there's the official Howard Hughes Corporation website, Howard Hughes Corp. And IATA also has information on the history resources on their website, IATA.org. And you can find information on the history of aviation, as well as the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum has a Howard Hughes collection, and their website is airandspace.si.edu. And Howard Hughes may have left us 40 years ago, but his spirit of innovation and daring lives on, whether you're an aspiring pilot, an engineer, or even someone with a dream. Remember the legacy. The future of aviation is in your hands. And you also can make your dreams come true, just in the same way that Howard Hughes made his dreams come true. So, Derrick, I don't know if you can add to that.
Yeah, he's a hero in many ways to me, because the story fascinates me to the point that I've often been told by significant others that I am obsessed with Howard Hughes. My personal favorite thing is the quotes. I didn't prepare any for the podcast, but if you go online and look at Howard Hughes quotes, there's lots. David probably actually has some. Do you have some quotes?
I actually do not have a quote.
See, I didn't either. I didn't have time to get that prepared. But so Aerophile, David Rowe, you were there for this photo in your background?
Well, I'm old, but I am not that old. I was there at the end of his life. I was not there at the beginning.
I had to do that. But yeah, Aerophile, what do you got going on at Aerophile?
I am digging through photos from my recent trip to Virginia Beach. I have published some pictures from the Hampton Air Power Park that I stopped at while I was in Virginia Beach. I've got some videos upcoming. As a matter of fact, I've just completed all the videos from the trip. So the Tricolore, I've got a F-22, F-18, some Warbirds. Those will all be coming out on my Aerophile YouTube channel in about 3 weeks. As soon as I get finished with my Thunder over Louisville videos, which are currently coming out. I've got them stacked up for about a month and a half, 2 months. There's lots of videos coming your way. So come check me out on Aerophile on all social media.
Now, David, I'm headed next week to, I always take my vacations in late September. I'm headed to Gulf Shores. Me and Dad's going to head up and spend a day at the USS Alabama, which you were recently there. What can I expect at the USS Alabama?
A lot to see. They have a massive park outside of the battleship with aviation aircraft all over the place. They have tanks. They've got a B-52 in their park. They've got an SR-71 in their park. They have a Medal of Honor pavilion that you can go inside and see some Medal of Honor things, a hut that a replica of a hut that some Medal of Honor captives were actually held in. And then once you get on the ship, it's just deep and dark and full of alleyways and ladders, and it's World War II battleship. This is what it is. Hopefully yours will be much cooler than my visit. Mm-hmm. I was there in June, and it was 90 plus degrees, and it was hotter than Hades. Hopefully your visit will be much cooler and much more comfortable.
We're hoping so, and right now there's quite a bit of weather going on down there, so we're kind of keeping an eye on that for the trip down next Wednesday.
Well, safe travels. Be safe.
Definitely will do. Julien Martinson, what have you got going on social media? And you got this book we talked about here a while back on the podcast, which I just finished reading.
Oh, yes, that's right. So I was inspired to write this book called The Ultimate Guide to Careers in Aviation. I'll just show it to the camera here. And it's a book that's targeted Gen Zs. So that's kids aged 12 to 28 years old. It's available on Amazon. And it talks about a brief overview of the history of aviation and how it all came to be. And then we go into the challenges of airports and airlines. And then the book splits into 4 different career occupations that are highly sought after and very lucrative within the aviation industry, and that is pilots. Pilots are not going away. Although there's talk about having 1 pilot per airplane, I just can't see that being a reality coming up soon. And passengers and the government will not, there are many barriers to passengers and the government endorsing a single pilot to be responsible for an aircraft with so many people on board. So that's one occupation group. The second one is aircraft engineering. And so that chapter breaks into several career groups that include aircraft design, aircraft electronics, and navigational aids, as well as other areas of aircraft engineering. And then the third occupation is air traffic control. So many people have the impression that an air traffic controller sits in an air traffic control tower. And while this is true, keep in mind that many airports have 2 air traffic control towers, one to manage the airplanes in the sky and the other one to manage the airplanes around the tarmac. But keep also in mind that many airspaces, especially in Canada, for an example, is divided into 4 territories. So Canada, for an example, is divided into the 4 airspaces, and those spaces are managed by people actually sitting on the ground in a building, and they manage the airplanes in that airspace. And finally, the 4th occupation is aviation management. Now, this is a very big area of aviation, not to be underestimated. Airlines and airports have a symbiotic relationship. So that means that they're codependent a little bit on each other. However, many of their management strategies have distinct roles. So airports will have their own managers, as well as airlines will have different managers. And so this is often very interesting because airlines operate by their schedule, and airports often are managed by the safe and efficient transition of people through their terminals. And so sometimes this creates conflicting agendas, which can be resolved by aviation managers. And then finally, we need aviation managers to oversee that national and global aviation traffic. So every country will have their own aviation safety board and so forth, different roles that can be done by aviation managers. So the industry is growing rapidly, and there's many opportunities for young people to take on very interesting careers that are lucrative, globally connected, and innovative. So the world is your oyster. If you have any questions about potential careers in aviation, don't hesitate to reach out to me, or you can find my book available on Amazon.
Definitely, for sure. Dave Gorman, what have you been up to, buddy? We haven't seen you in a couple, 3 weeks?
Well, I've been around, so again, it's a busy time in school, still getting things rolling and everything. Not a whole lot of updates on the social media, although I've found a hard drive that had some videos I haven't shared going back a few years. So I'm kind of going through there. There's probably a reason that I overlooked them in the first place, but there may be some goodies that I can put out there. You know, Rowe set such a standard.
He does.
I'm feeling the heat from him in terms of trying to keep up, and I really should just surrender and all hail Rowe, because I think that's where we're headed. But I'll see what I can find and put some things up. But things are good. Things are busy. I need to get out to the airport soon. I did go down to Athens, Tennessee. Actually, I'm sorry, down to where was I, David? That wasn't
Dayton.
Yeah.
Got to see a PBY that had flown in, and it may not fly out anytime soon. They're having a few issues they're working through. But there was a P-51 Mustang there, some Globe Swifts, T-6, a nice array, a BT-11, nice array of aircraft, a lot of privately owned, a few home builds, things like that. It was good to get out in the weather and see some aircraft again. So good stuff.
Absolutely, and I enjoyed it, guys.
Yeah, definitely an interesting character that we just discussed. I'm glad we dug deep on him.
Yeah, it was great. I've been looking forward to this one. 62 episodes. So, and the History of Aviation podcast. Dave Gorman, we've got the Facebook group over there.
Facebook group. We'd love to have people checking in with us and making suggestions or comments. We'd like the likes, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Check in with us. Tell us what you're interested in hearing about.
Yeah, and we also have a Facebook page. We're on Instagram and Twitter. The shorts, we're doing the short videos on TikTok and YouTube shorts now, which are very popular. So we're happy about that.
I was supposed to be wearing shorts, not the same.
Oh, sorry. I didn't put the memo out.
All right, we'll work on that.
We definitely will. For David Rowe, Julien Martinson, Dave Gorman, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
Listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.